Hello, my name is Mr. Brennan, and for years I quietly endured the lies, the manipulation, and the constant betrayal from the people I loved most. This Thanksgiving, I finally spoke up, but what I uncovered was beyond anything I could have imagined. My daughter-in-law handed me a bottle of wine, and that's when everything changed. They tried to keep me out, but the truth, it was far worse than I ever thought. Now I know the real reason they've been using me all along, and it's tearing everything apart. Thanksgiving morning, and the house was filled with the scent of turkey roasting in the oven, the faint smell of mashed potatoes, and the sweet aroma of pumpkin pie that could barely reach me through the clamor of voices and laughter filling the kitchen. I sat quietly at the dining table, my old eyes scanning the room, watching the busy movements of my family, going through the motions of yet another holiday gathering. I wasn't really part of it, just a fixture, a forgotten, unappreciated fixture. My son Kyle was cracking jokes with his wife Kate. My daughter Emily was stirring something in a pot, humming lightly to herself. My wife Sarah was in the living room arranging the decorations, her fingers moving quickly but her eyes too distant. The children, my grandchildren, were running around the house, their energy filling the space I no longer occupied. I could feel it, the ever-present weight of being invisible. I'd spent years being the backbone of this family, tirelessly providing and sacrificing, but now, I was just a spectator, an extra character in a play I no longer had a role in. And yet, I sat there smiling faintly at my son as he passed by, not realizing how deeply the hollowness had settled in my chest. A soft sigh escaped my lips, unnoticed by everyone around me. As the table filled up, there was a small commotion. Kate, my daughter-in-law, walked over holding a small gift in her hands. She smiled at me a little too brightly. "I thought you might like this, Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice light. She handed me a bottle of wine. Just that, no card, no special words, just the wine, wrapped in simple brown paper, as if it was meant to be an afterthought. I took it from her, fingers brushing hers for a moment longer than necessary, but my mind didn't register the gesture as kind. I saw it for what it truly was. A token. Another empty gesture. The kind of gift you give when you don't really know the person, when you've run out of ideas but still feel obligated to do something. I nodded and muttered a quiet, "Thank you." She smiled back before turning away and walking back to the kitchen, lost in conversation with Kyle. I sat there with the wine in my hands, my thoughts swirling. The familiar weight of disappointment pressed into my chest. Why did they bother? Why did they think this was enough? I looked at the bottle again, and then on impulse I stood up, slowly making my way to the other side of the room. There, sitting comfortably on the couch, was my son-in-law, Greg. He looked up at me as I approached, surprised. I could feel the weight of his gaze as I handed him the bottle of wine, a silent exchange of disappointment and acceptance. "It's for you," I said. "Might be more useful over there." His eyes widened slightly, but he smiled, the same empty, polite smile he had given me before. He took the bottle with a wordless thank you, and I turned away before I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and bitterness. He didn't deserve it, but at the same time, neither did I. As the family settled down for the meal, I watched them. I watched how Kyle laughed too loudly, how Sarah barely looked up from her phone, how Emily and Greg exchanged quick glances talking about their next vacation plans. And there I was, just sitting, silently, forgotten. Nobody mentioned the years I'd spent providing for them. Nobody spoke of the sacrifices I made. Late nights working, holidays spent alone, years of grinding through life so they could have everything they needed. Not a single word of thanks for a lifetime of effort. They didn't see me. As the meal wore on, the noise and chaos of the table felt like a distant hum in my ears. My eyes wandered to the turkey, now half carved, the gravy boat that had been passed around, the mashed potatoes being served in heaping portions. It was all so normal, so routine, so hollow. And then, just as the thought crossed my mind, it hit me. This was how it had always been. Years of sacrifices, years of work, and this was what I got in return. The wine, the polite smiles, the feeling of being invisible. No one cared. The realization was sharp, but it wasn't new. The feeling had been creeping up for years now. I had let it happen. I had allowed myself to become nothing more than a background figure in my own family's life. I glanced at Sarah sitting across the table. She wasn't even looking at me. It was the same every year. And yet I couldn't help but feel a pang of longing, a desire to be seen, to be valued, to matter. But those days were long gone. I knew that now. As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating further into the background until I was a mere shadow of a man at the table. I was only half there, my mind lost in memories of days gone by. The family, the house, the laughter, they were all fading away in my mind. And as the night drew to a close, I was left alone with my thoughts. I had given up too much, for too long, and it was time to stop. I had to stop letting them see me as invisible. "I won't be invisible anymore," I muttered under my breath, the words barely audible over the clatter of dishes being cleared away. It had been a few days since Thanksgiving, and the weight of my silence still sat heavy in my chest. Every time I thought about the wine bottle, about the empty gestures, I felt a quiet storm building inside me. The family had gone on with their lives, pretending everything was fine, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't just sit in the background silently watching year after year as they took my efforts for granted. Something had to change. It was time. It was time to stop silently enduring, to stop letting them overlook me. I had been invisible for too long. The decision felt almost absurd. Something so simple, but something I hadn't dared to do in years. Speak. Speak up for myself. It had been decades since I raised my voice in the family, but now I was done keeping quiet. It wasn't that I didn't love them. I did, more than they could ever understand. But love alone couldn't keep me in this cage any longer. I had been the good father, the dutiful husband, the dependable figure. Now I was nothing more than a shadow in my own home. I was going to confront them. The time for silence was over. Dinner that evening was just like any other. The clinking of silverware against plates, the drone of conversations about work, the latest TV show, or a vacation that was coming up. It was all so predictable. I could hear my son Kyle talking about his promotion at work. I could hear my daughter Emily discussing her kids' latest achievements. And in the midst of it all, I was still just sitting there, invisible. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I waited for the right moment. I waited for the lull in conversation, the pause that would make it impossible to ignore me. And when it came, I stood up slowly, deliberately. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But it was enough to stop the conversation. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was firm. The table went silent. All eyes turned toward me, but no one said a word. My heart began to race, and the familiar lump in my throat returned. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my mind, but now that it was happening, the words seemed to hang in the air, unspoken. I wasn't sure how to begin, how to make them understand. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to find the right words. I don't know how to say this," I started, my voice faltering. "But I've been feeling invisible. I've given my whole life to this family. I've worked hard. I've sacrificed. And yet every year it feels like no one notices, like I don't even matter anymore." I looked across the table at each of their faces. Kyle, Emily, Sarah. They all seemed confused, like I had just dropped a bombshell in the middle of dinner. But Kyle, he was the first to respond. He laughed a little too loud, like he thought it was a joke. "Come on, Dad," Kyle said, grinning. "It's Thanksgiving. What's all this about?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. I tried to keep my composure, but the anger surged through me. "No, Kyle," I said, my voice steadier now, but sharp. "It's not about Thanksgiving. It's about years of being ignored, of being treated like I don't matter. I gave everything to this family, and not once have any of you really acknowledged that, not once. The room fell silent again. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. I was done being dismissed. Emily's face twisted, the defensiveness clear in her eyes. "Dad, you're just being dramatic," she said, her voice rising. "You're always making things more complicated than they are." The words stung, but they didn't break me. I looked at her, trying to understand why they couldn't see it, why they couldn't see me. The hurt in my chest deepened as I realized how little my feelings seemed to matter. It wasn't just about the wine anymore. It was about everything. The years of silence, the lack of appreciation, the constant feeling of being pushed to the margins of my own life. My daughter-in-law Kate chimed in then, her tone soft but dismissive. "You know, maybe you just need to relax, Mr. Brennan. It's not that serious." Relax. That was it, wasn't it? Just relax. As if my feelings could be dismissed so easily. As if all the years of sacrifice could be brushed aside because they didn't want to face the truth. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, trying to hold on to the little bit of dignity I had left. But then my wife, Sarah, spoke, her voice quiet but unmistakably defensive. "You're making a scene, Tom," she said. "This is not the time or place." Her words hit me harder than anything Kyle or Emily had said. I thought she would be the one to understand. I thought she would be the one to see. But instead, she had joined in the chorus of dismissive voices. She was defending them, not me. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent too many years being passive, too many years letting them treat me like a background character in my own life. I had been silent for too long. Without another word, I stood up, and without looking at any of them, I walked away. I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to hear their excuses or their false pity. I needed to think. I needed space. I retreated to my study, the only place where I felt any semblance of control. The door clicked shut behind me, and I sank into the chair at my desk. The silence in the room was a relief. But it wasn't enough. I couldn't be invisible anymore. I was done with that. I was done letting them think they could walk all over me. It was time to reclaim myself. The evening after the dinner confrontation, I sat alone in my study, the room filled with the weight of my thoughts. The silence in the house was oppressive, almost suffocating. I could still hear the words they'd said to me echoing in my mind like a broken record. I had spoken up for the first time in years, but nothing had changed. My son had laughed it off, Emily had dismissed my feelings, and Sarah hadn't even come to my defense. Instead, she had quietly accepted their behavior as if it was just another part of our everyday life. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The frustration, the anger, it was all bubbling up inside me. But more than anything, I felt betrayed. Not just by Kyle, but by Sarah too. The woman who had promised to be my partner, my equal, was no longer standing beside me. She was siding with them, with the very people who had disregarded me for so long. I had spent years building a life with her, supporting her, loving her, and this was what I got in return. It was like I was invisible, but worse than that, I was becoming a burden. The years of silence, of letting their neglect go unchallenged, had worn me down. I had let it happen. And now I was paying the price. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the dark. The streetlights flickered in the distance, and for a moment I let the cold night air wash over me. It was calm outside, but inside I was anything but. The hurt, the anger, it was all building, and I knew I couldn't keep it inside much longer. I was done. Done letting them treat me like this. Done being the silent observer. It was time to make my voice heard again. The plan formed in my mind slowly but with growing clarity. I wasn't going to let this go on. I wasn't going to keep accepting their dismissiveness. I had a family to confront, and this time, I wasn't going to back down. I didn't know exactly how it would go, whether I'd find the right words, whether they'd listen, but I knew I had to try. I wasn't about to be their doormat anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. The house felt colder, quieter. Kyle and Emily hardly spoke to me, and Sarah seemed distant. The silence between us was unbearable. But still, I kept my decision close, like a secret I was trying to guard. Every moment felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the right time. It was at the family dinner the following Sunday when the moment finally came. I sat at the table, quietly watching them all. The usual chatter was there, Kyle talking about his latest project at work, Emily discussing the kids' school activities. But it all felt so hollow. I could feel the tension, thick in the air, but no one seemed willing to address it. Everyone acted like everything was normal. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Not this time. I waited for the perfect moment, when the conversation lulled and the room fell into a brief silence. And then I took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and said, "We need to talk." The words hung in the air, like a stone thrown into a still pond. They all turned to look at me. The table fell silent, all eyes on me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. It felt like a lifetime had passed in that single moment, but I didn't back down. I've been thinking about a lot of things, and I can't stay silent anymore. For years, I've been trying to hold this family together, trying to support all of you, but it feels like no one appreciates it. No one acknowledges what I've done. The words sounded different now that they were out in the open. I could see the surprise in their eyes, but also something else, something I didn't expect. They didn't know how to respond. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." "Everything's fine." Everything was fine. His words hit me like a slap. "Fine? Really?" "No, Kyle, it's not fine," I said, my voice firming. "I've been overlooked, underappreciated, and for what? So you can keep acting like nothing is wrong?" Kyle's face flushed with embarrassment, but instead of saying anything more, he just shrugged it off. "It's just dinner, Dad. Don't make a big deal out of this." The words stung. The dismissiveness, the lack of care, it all came rushing back. I looked over at Emily, hoping for some kind of understanding, but she just stared at her plate, her lips pressed tight. Then I felt a sharp twist of disbelief. My own wife, Sarah, who had always been my partner, didn't come to my defense either. She sat there quiet, avoiding my gaze. She didn't speak up. It was like she was content to let this continue, like it was normal for me to be treated this way. "You're right," I said, my voice quivering with emotion. "I've been silent long enough. I've let all of you take me for granted. I've done everything for this family, and not once have any of you ever truly seen me." I could feel the anger rising in me now, hot and sharp. I was done holding it in. This had gone on long enough. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Tom, maybe this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted, my voice breaking through the tension. "No, Sarah, it's time. You've all treated me like I don't matter, and I've let it happen. But not anymore." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. No one spoke. The words were out in the open now, hanging between us like a heavy fog. I could see the guilt in their eyes, but I wasn't sure it would change anything. I wasn't sure anything could. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. And then, with a deep breath, I walked out of the room. I didn't know what was next, but I knew I couldn't stay in that silence any longer. I wasn't going to let them break me. The house was quieter than it had been in years. Even the occasional sounds of the TV or dishes clinking in the kitchen didn't fill the space the way they used to. No, this was different. This was something heavy, something I could feel deep in my bones. The family dinner confrontation had left its mark on all of us. Kyle's defensive words, Emily's passive-aggressive silence, it was all still fresh like a bitter taste in my mouth. But what stung the most wasn't what they said. It wasn't the dismissive attitude or even the way they shrugged off my feelings. No, what hurt the most was the look on Sarah's face. My own wife. She didn't defend me, didn't even speak up in my defense. Instead, she sat there, quietly observing the tension, her silence louder than any argument. She wasn't just complicit in their mistreatment of me, she was silently endorsing it. The realization hit me like a cold slap in the face. For years, I had been the one to keep the peace, to keep the family running smoothly while my contributions were overlooked. But now, the truth was undeniable. Sarah wasn't the partner I thought she was. She wasn't standing by me. She had, in fact, become part of the problem. The weight of that thought crushed me. I had always believed in the sanctity of family, in the idea that we were supposed to support one another, especially in times of need. But here I was, betrayed not just by my son, but by the woman I had loved for decades. My mind swirled with thoughts, each one more painful than the last. I had given everything for this family, and in return, I was nothing more than a backdrop to their lives, a shadow. But I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I couldn't afford to be. The next few days passed in a blur of reflection. I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in my own life, stuck in a role I hadn't asked for, but had allowed to happen. I had spent so much time tiptoeing around everyone's feelings, burying my own hurt, and now I was tired. Tired of being the silent one, the one who always gave without ever receiving. It was time to take control. I was done being passive. I spent hours thinking, planning, trying to figure out what my next step should be. What could I say to make them see? Would they even listen? Would anything change, or was this just the way things were now? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go on like this. By the time the family meeting was scheduled, I had made up my mind. This was going to be it. No more holding back. If they weren't going to see me for who I was, then I was going to make them. I wasn't going to play the part of the doting father and husband anymore. I wasn't going to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The day of the meeting, I could feel the tension building inside me. My hands were shaking, my chest tight. I had prepared myself for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare me for the reality of confronting my family. I had no idea how they'd react, but I knew this had to happen. I couldn't let them dictate the narrative of my life any longer. As we sat down at the table, I could feel the silence hanging between us. It wasn't the comfortable silence that used to exist when we were all content, no. It was the kind of silence that fills a room with unspoken words, with unsaid accusations. I looked at Sarah first. Her eyes were downcast, her fingers playing with the edge of her napkin. She didn't look up. "Well," I began, my voice firm but wavering with the weight of years of frustration. "We need to talk." The words felt like they had been building inside me for so long that they finally spilled out, unfiltered. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to keep going. "I've spent so many years taking care of this family, doing everything for all of you, and not once have any of you truly seen me. All these years, and I've been invisible, but I'm not invisible anymore." I paused, watching their faces. Kyle's face was blank, but I could see the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Emily's lips were pressed tight, and Sarah just sat there, silent. "I'm done pretending," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Done being the one who does all the work, who sacrifices his own happiness so that everyone else can be happy. You've all taken me for granted, and I've let you. Well, not anymore." Kyle shifted in his seat. "Dad, this is just—" "No!" I cut him off, my words coming out sharper than I intended. "You don't get to tell me this is nothing. You've dismissed me for years, all of you. You've treated me like I don't matter, and I can't keep letting you do that." The room was dead silent now. No one spoke. But I could feel their discomfort, the way the weight of my words settled in the space between us. Sarah finally spoke, but her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Tom, you're overreacting. This isn't the way to handle this." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Overreacting. This was my life. This was me finally standing up for myself. and yet she couldn't even offer me the support I needed. I felt my chest tighten, a lump forming in my throat. "I've been quiet for too long, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I've been quiet for you, for all of you, but not anymore. I'm done being the invisible man in my own family." The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I could see the hurt in Kyle's eyes, the confusion in Emily's, but there was nothing from Sarah, nothing at all. She just sat there, her gaze averted, like she couldn't even bear to look at me. I stood up, my chair scraping across the floor. "I'm done," I said, my voice strong. "I won't be part of this any longer. I won't be ignored. I won't be taken for granted." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them all behind. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew one thing. I was finally taking control, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me again. The silence in the house was unbearable. Since the family meeting, it felt like a weight had settled over everything. No more of the usual chatter. Kyle's anger was evident in the way he avoided eye contact, his every movement stiff and resentful. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed almost unaffected, detached, as if nothing had changed at all. I caught myself staring at her, trying to understand how she could stay so calm, so indifferent. How could she let this continue? How could she just sit there while everything I've ever done for this family was dismissed? But the anger I felt toward them wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I had come to realize. The battle wasn't just with my family. It was with myself. All these years I had allowed this to happen. I had quietly accepted my role, played the part of the invisible father and husband, and expected nothing in return. But it wasn't just them. It was me too. I had let my own passivity become the enemy. I had let this happen. As I sat alone in the quiet of my home, my mind began to race. I had spent so much time pleasing everyone around me, sacrificing my own happiness and needs to keep the peace, to maintain the family's fragile harmony. But now, the reality hit me hard. In doing so, I had built my own prison, a prison of silence, of complacency. I thought I was doing the right thing, but all it had done was enable them to overlook me, to take me for granted. And now, I was paying the price for it. The weight of that realization was crushing, but at the same time, it was liberating. It wasn't too late to change. I could still reclaim my life. I could still fight back, but not just against them, against the person I had allowed myself to become. Days passed as I stewed in my thoughts, but I finally made a decision. I wasn't going to let this continue. I was done being the silent martyr. I wasn't going to let them control my life anymore. My first step would be to set boundaries. I was going to make them see me, really see me, for the first time in years. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand. I reached out to an old friend, someone I'd known for years. We hadn't talked much in recent times, but I knew he would listen. When we met, I shared my thoughts, my frustrations, and my plan. He didn't try to give me advice or tell me what to do. He simply listened. And that made all the difference. I realized then that I wasn't alone in this. I had people who cared, who respected me, and who believed in me. That conversation sparked something inside me. I wasn't going to let my family's disregard define who I was anymore. I wasn't going to play the role they had assigned me. I was going to take control of my life, and I wasn't going to ask for permission. A few days later, we had another family gathering. I was ready. Ready to face them, ready to make them see what I had been too afraid to show them before. But this time, instead of speaking my mind and confronting them head-on, I chose silence. I watched as the family continued to chat, but this time I didn't engage. I let the silence speak for me. It was a strange feeling, but somehow it felt right. I knew that this would get their attention. The longer the silence stretched, the more uncomfortable they became. I could see the unease in their faces, the way they shifted in their seats. They didn't know how to react. They expected me to participate, to keep up the facade, but I wasn't going to do it anymore. Kyle broke the silence first. "Dad, what's going on with you? You're acting strange." I stood up without saying a word, my gaze fixed on them for a long, uncomfortable moment. I didn't need to say anything else. My silence had already said it all. I turned and walked away from the gathering, leaving them to sit in the tension I had created. That night, as I sat in my study, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just standing up to them anymore. I was standing up for myself. The silence, the absence of words, had been the loudest statement I could make. It was a declaration of self-respect. As I sat there reflecting on everything that had happened, a sense of peace began to settle over me. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I had spent my whole life chasing something that wasn't worth chasing. Now I was finally free. Free to be myself. Free to live my life on my own terms. The family would have to adjust. They would have to face the consequences of their actions. But I wasn't going to wait around for them to change. I had already changed, and that was enough. The house was eerily quiet. The tension from the previous confrontation still hung thick in the air. Every moment seemed to drag as I watched my family. Kyle, my son, was brooding in the corner, his anger barely contained. Sarah, my wife, barely reacted, her indifference cutting deeper than any words. The silence between us was louder than any argument could have been. It was a storm waiting to happen. I had made my stand, but the realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about my family. This was about me. It wasn't only their disrespect that I was fighting against, it was the years of silence, the years of letting myself be invisible. The biggest enemy wasn't Kyle or Sarah. It was the man I had allowed myself to become, the man who swallowed his words and kept his thoughts hidden to avoid conflict. Now, I could no longer ignore the cost of that passivity. The quiet rage simmered inside me as I paced back and forth in the living room, contemplating my next move. I had spent far too long being the silent observer in my own life. For years, I allowed my family to walk all over me, to take me for granted. It had been my choice, yes, but I had been blind to the damage it was doing to my soul. I realized that it was time for action, that silence alone wouldn't heal this wound. It was time to confront the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile illusions we had built. I'd had enough. The facade of peace had been shattered. I wasn't going to be passive anymore. I wasn't going to be the invisible man in my own home. It was time to make them see me, truly see me, for who I was, not just the man who took care of things or fixed problems, but the man who deserved respect, love, and recognition. That night, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to back down. I would speak up, but this time I would speak with a voice that carried weight. I wasn't asking for anything anymore. I was taking control. The next morning, I set the stage for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I called Kyle into my study. I told him we needed to talk. The moment he sat across from me, I saw the same defensive posture in him, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was waiting for me to make the first move, but this time, I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "Dad, what's this about?" he asked, his voice cold. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had been silent for too long. Now was my chance to change the narrative. "It's about respect," I said, my voice calm but firm. "It's about me not being invisible anymore. You and your mother, you've taken me for granted, and I've let it happen." Kyle's expression hardened, but I pressed on. "I've spent my life doing what was expected of me, keeping my head down, making sure everyone else was taken care of. But no more. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you that I won't stay in the shadows anymore." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a little guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the words I was speaking. "I didn't ask for this," he snapped back. "You've always been distant, always withdrawn. I didn't know what else to do." "Distant," I repeated, leaning forward. "I've been distant because you've never bothered to see me. You've never bothered to understand what I've sacrificed for you, for this family." He sat back, clearly struggling with his emotions. "What do you want from me, Dad? What do you expect me to do?" I expect you to see me, I said, my voice unwavering. I expect you to recognize what I've done and to stop pretending that my silence means nothing. Kyle didn't say anything for a long while. The silence between us was different now, no longer a barrier, but a challenge. He shifted again, clearly on edge. You think I'm the one who's been wrong? He finally asked, bitterness lacing his words. Maybe you're the one who's been too weak to speak up all these years. Maybe you're the problem. That hit hard, but it also fueled my resolve. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. Weak. I've been weak for you. I've kept my mouth shut for you. But not anymore. I could feel the tension building, but I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I'm done, I said, my voice low and final. Done trying to fix things that are broken. Done living in this cycle of resentment. You've had your chance to understand. Now it's my turn. I'm done being the silent martyr. The weight of my words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. But as I looked at Kyle, I saw something shift. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't backing down. But for the first time in years, he looked like he didn't have all the answers. I turned away and walked out of the room, leaving him to process what I had just said. Later that night, as I sat in my study, the quiet felt different. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of power, a sense of liberation. I had spoken my truth, and no one could take that away from me, but I knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. The days following the confrontation felt like the calm before a storm. I kept my silence, watching the growing unease in my family. Kyle was more withdrawn than ever, his defensiveness like an impenetrable wall. Sarah, on the other hand, remained detached, her icy indifference acting as a subtle reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The silence between us was suffocating, but I knew it was only temporary. A change was coming, and it was inevitable. I had made my decision. No more empty words, no more pretending. I had spent my entire life placating them, suppressing my needs, my desires, my voice. But now I would confront them, even if it tore our family apart. I pulled Kyle aside, expecting resistance, but what came next surprised me. He looked at me with disdain, his arms crossed as if he already knew what was coming. "What do you want, old man?" he sneered, trying to mask his discomfort. "I want respect," I said calmly. "I've given you everything, and what have I gotten in return? A lifetime of being ignored, dismissed, taken for granted. I've had enough. It's time you understood that I am no longer the silent one in this family." Kyle's face twisted in frustration. "You're just mad because you're finally seeing what we've all been dealing with. You've been checked out for years." I stood tall, the weight of his words almost pushing me over the edge, but I held firm. "You think I've been checked out? I've been holding this family together, carrying your weight, your mother's weight, and for what? To be treated like a ghost in my own home?" The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, but Kyle didn't respond. He just sat there fuming, unable to come up with an answer that could justify the years of neglect. Sarah entered the room, her expression unreadable. "What's all this about now?" she asked, her voice sharp with disinterest. I looked at her, my voice quiet but firm. "It's about respect, Sarah. About the fact that I've spent years being invisible to you, to him," I pointed to Kyle, "and I won't stand for it anymore. I've let you both walk all over me, but I'm done." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You think I've been walking all over you? You've always had it easy. You've never had to worry about anything. You think we owe you something? You're the one who chose this life. If you feel overlooked, maybe it's because you've never done anything to change it." Her words hit like a slap in the face. I felt a surge of anger rise in me. How could she not see it? The years I had spent sacrificing everything for this family, and yet here she was defending their disregard. The coldness in her voice, the dismissive tone, it was the final straw. "I never asked for your approval," I said, my voice rising. "I never asked for anything, but I deserve more than this. And I'm not going to play along with this toxic charade anymore." If you can't see that, then maybe we're done. Sarah's face hardened, and Kyle stood up, his hands clenched into fists. You don't get it, do you? You're the problem. You've never been there for us. Now you're playing the victim because we're finally calling you out? I felt the anger boil inside me, but I wasn't going to let them see me break. I had been the martyr long enough. I'm not the problem, Kyle, I said, standing taller. I've been the one trying to hold this family together while you've been too busy pointing fingers. You're so blind to what's been happening that you don't even realize the part you've played in this. And I'm done. There was a silence, a thick, heavy silence that felt like it was crushing me. But it was different now. I was no longer a passive observer. I had stood up for myself, and it felt liberating. But as I turned to leave, I knew the fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As I walked away from the confrontation, the realization hit me. I wasn't fighting just for respect. I was fighting for my dignity, my life. I knew I had to go further. This wasn't just about them. It was about me reclaiming my voice, my power, and if they weren't willing to recognize that, then they would have to live with the consequences. Later that evening, I sat down with a close friend of mine, someone who had always respected me, someone who had been a witness to the subtle manipulations over the years. It was time to put the pieces together. I couldn't fight this battle alone anymore. Do you ever wonder, my friend asked, how much of what's happening now is because you let it go on for so long? Maybe it's time to stop fighting this battle on their terms. The words resonated deep within me. He was right. I had been playing by their rules, their expectations. Now I needed to play by mine. The next day, I put my plan into motion. I knew it was time for the final confrontation. No more games, no more pretending. I was going to take my power back, even if it meant walking away from everything I had known. That night, as I stood in front of my family ready to lay it all out, I could feel the weight of the past bearing down on me. But I also felt something else, empowerment. This was my moment. I would not be silenced anymore. Enough, I said, my voice calm but unwavering. I've been complicit in my own misery, but I won't do it anymore. I'm done. The room was quiet. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in my own truth. The days following the confrontation were filled with silence, an uneasy, suffocating silence that wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. The tension in the house was thick, almost palpable. I had made my choice, but it wasn't easy. After so many years of keeping quiet, of being ignored and mistreated, I had finally reached a point where I had to decide. Stay and accept this broken family dynamic, or walk away and fight for something better. It was late one evening when my son, Kyle, approached me, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. Dad, I've been thinking, he started, his voice low. Maybe we could try again. I know things have been rough, but what if we start over? We can fix this together. His words were a tempting offer, just a sliver of hope that things could be different. But even as he spoke, I felt a sense of betrayal creeping in. His offer wasn't genuine, it was manipulation. He wasn't apologizing, he was trying to rope me back into the same toxic cycle. You want me to just forgive and forget, don't you? I said quietly. You want me to pretend like nothing happened, like I didn't just spend my life making sacrifices while you all did whatever you wanted. You think a few nice words will fix everything? Kyle's expression hardened, but I could see the cracks in his facade. I'm just trying to make things right, Dad. You can't keep holding on to the past forever. This family needs you. I could feel the weight of his words, but something inside me snapped. The truth hit harder than anything he could say. It wasn't just Kyle. It was all of them. Every manipulation, every emotional abandonment had led me to this moment. The price of reconciliation was too high. I wasn't going to trade my dignity for their empty promises. I walked away from him, the bitter taste of realization settling in my throat. No amount of words could change what had happened. No amount of promises could undo the damage. I had been a passive participant for too long, and now it was time for me to decide what I wanted my life to look like. That night, I spent hours pacing the house, trying to weigh my options. Could I return to this toxic environment? Could I live with myself knowing I had compromised my values for the sake of family peace? The answer came quickly. No, I couldn't. The next morning, I sat down with an old friend, someone who had always respected me for who I was, not what I could do for others. I needed clarity, and he gave it to me. "You've been carrying this burden alone for so long," he said. "You have to ask yourself, is the price of peace worth losing yourself in the process?" His words echoed in my mind louder than anything I had heard from my family in years. Peace at what cost? A hollow peace where I would lose my identity? No, I wasn't going to let that happen. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon, I called Kyle into the living room. He was looking at me like I was about to deliver some kind of punishment, but the truth was, I was the one who had been punished for years. "I'm done," I told him, my voice calm but resolute. "I'm done pretending. I've spent my entire life sacrificing everything for this family, and what have I gotten in return? Disrespect. Dismissal. I've been invisible for far too long." Kyle's face fell. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "No," I said. "I'm done. This cycle ends with me. I'm leaving." His eyes widened, and I saw the panic flash across his face. "Dad, don't do this. We can fix it. Please, we're family." I shook my head. "No, this is the problem, Kyle. You think we can fix it by pretending everything is okay, by brushing everything under the rug, but it's not okay. It hasn't been okay for a long time. I can't live like this anymore." Sarah entered the room then, her eyes narrow and cold. "Are you seriously doing this? You're just going to throw everything away?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally choosing myself." I could see the anger and resentment building in her, but this time it didn't matter. I wasn't going to allow her to manipulate me anymore. With a final glance at Kyle and Sarah, I turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't stay one more second. I packed my bags in silence. As I loaded the car, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The decision was made. I was leaving. I was breaking free from their hold on me, from the family that had never seen me, never truly cared. I couldn't allow their dysfunction to define me any longer. As I drove away, the weight of the past began to lift. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the life I had been living. And then, as if the universe had heard my silent plea for reassurance, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my old friend. He had found a place for me to stay, a new beginning. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe I was finally free to rebuild my life on my own terms. The silence in the days that followed my departure from the family was heavy, almost suffocating. I knew I had made the right choice, but the weight of the past was harder to shake off than I had expected. As I sat in my small apartment, reflecting on the life I had left behind, I found myself questioning the cost of everything. My mind kept replaying the years of sacrifice, the family dinners, the holidays, the empty spaces where love should have been, but there was no going back. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. And then, just when I thought I had settled into my new reality, a letter arrived. I didn't expect it. Not from her. Not after all these years. It was from my sister Mary, the one person in the family who had always been quiet but who had never completely turned her back on me. The letter was simple, but its words hit me like a wave. "I know we've both been through a lot, and I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. I've been thinking a lot about the family, and I think it's time we start over. If you're open to it, I'd like to help us rebuild, even if it's just a little bit at a time. I know it might be too late, but I wanted to offer this. I miss you, and I hope we can figure this out together." I read it over and over, the familiar handwriting on the paper bringing back memories I had long buried. A part of me wanted to believe it, to let myself be pulled back into the family I had once tried to hold together. But another part of me, stronger now, was more cautious. Could I really trust her? Could I trust anyone in that family? I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of this new decision pressing down on me. Was I ready to open that door again, knowing the pain it might bring? The scars from the past weren't so easy to forget, no matter how much time had passed. My mind raced through the years of neglect, of manipulations, of emotional abandonment. But Mary was different. At least that's what I used to believe. The question was, did I still believe that? That evening, I took a walk to clear my head. The world outside felt so much quieter than the chaos I had left behind. I passed by the park where I used to walk with my children, back when things seemed simple. Before the silence, before the lies, it was hard not to feel the weight of all that history, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. The life I had now was mine to rebuild, and I wasn't going to let it be defined by the mistakes of others. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Kyle. I stared at the screen, hesitating. I had expected this, a call or a message trying to pull me back in. I could almost hear his voice in my head, full of guilt and desperation. I didn't answer. Not yet. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the world go by. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the life I had expected, but it was mine. My choices were my own now, and that freedom felt like a luxury I had never fully understood before. The next day, a familiar face appeared at my door. It was Mary. Her eyes were filled with an emotion I hadn't seen in a long time: sincerity. "I've thought about it and I get it," she said quietly. "You're right to be cautious, but I'm asking you to take a chance. I've changed, and I want to be part of your life again, not just as family, but as someone who's there for you, no strings attached." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the person I had once known, the person I had hoped would be there for me, the way I had always been there for others. "Mary," I said softly, "I'm not sure if I can ever go back to what we were. The past is too much to undo." "I don't want to undo the past," she replied, "but I want to be here now. And that's all I can offer." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure. I wasn't ready to rebuild everything, but maybe this was a step in the right direction. I walked away from that conversation with a new sense of understanding. The family I had known was broken, yes, but I wasn't broken with it. I was free, and maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing, even if it wasn't in the way I had once imagined. A few weeks later, an opportunity came that I never saw coming. An old colleague, someone I had worked with years ago, reached out with a job offer. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to start over professionally, to rebuild in ways I hadn't even considered. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine to shape. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped by the past. It was a hard decision to make, but I knew it was the right one. I had to leave behind the toxic ties of the past. I had to make space for new beginnings, for healing, for whatever was waiting out there. A week later, I attended one last family gathering. It wasn't easy to be there, to face everyone one last time. But I walked in with my head held high, my heart steady. I didn't have to fight anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was at peace. I had let go. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm but calm. "This family the way it's been, I can't be a part of that anymore. But I'm not leaving with hatred in my heart. I'm just leaving." And with that, I walked away for the last time. I didn't look back.